Well, quite a while ago, I was bowling, and I'm not a great bowler. But I have a cousin who is. I have a cousin, whenever we would go bowling together, he would be up there at least the mid-200s. And if you don't know bowling, the highest score you can get is 300. And so he was really good. Me, not so much. In fact, when I would go bowling, usually it goes like this. I might roll a couple good bowls here and there, but it would take me a while to get warmed up. And finally, towards the end of the game, I was getting into it. And I was actually starting to do okay. 10th frame, I rolled that ball down the alley. Strike! I got all the pins down. And it's like, yes, finally, here at the end of the game, I get a strike. But you know what that means? It doesn't just mean I did great on that last time. It means I get to roll 2 more times. You get 2 more chances. The game's not done yet. You get to go again. And sometimes when we think that things are over, they're not. They're still going. Last Sunday, we saw Elijah stand up against the prophets of Baal, and God won that contest between them, proving that he was the true God. Fire from heaven consuming the altar and the offering and everything, proving that he is the true God. And the people of Israel who were there, they declared that Yahweh, God, is the real God. And I think we often read that incident and we get all pumped because it's very exciting and it's just an outstanding thing that happened there. And you're just like, wow, that's amazing. We're excited because God won. We say he's the real God. And then we move on as if, well, that was great. But God isn't done. In fact, as I studied this passage, these verses that we're going to look at this morning, that's the thought that kept coming to my mind all the way through. Every little thing that happened or was said, I kept thinking, God's not done. God's not done. And so we begin in chapter 18 and verse 41. Chapter 18 of 1Kings, verse 41. It says, and Elijah said to Ahab, go up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of rushing rain. Now, remember how all this started. Ahab and the people of Israel had started worshiping idols. They were worshiping the idol, the false god Baal, as well as a few others. Well, Baal was supposedly the storm god. In other words, that he controlled the rain. Also, if you remember, God had a covenant with Israel. And in that covenant, God had promised them, if you obey me, then I will bless you. I will send the rain. I will cause your crops to grow. Things will go well for you. And he said, but if you disobey me, if you follow after other gods, false gods, idols, I will not send the rain and your crops will not grow. It was a way of disciplining them and reminding them who the real God was and that they needed to come back to him. So Elijah, the prophet of God, had gone to the king Ahab and said, it's not going to rain until I say so again. Well, it's now 3.5 years later. God has just won this contest against Baal. And Elijah says, it's going to rain. And at that point, we're reminded, God's not done. It's going to rain. Why? Because God is not done. That drought is ending. But that's not the only important thing that's happening here. The important thing that we need to grasp is who is sending this rain. The drought is ending, the rain is coming, but who is sending that rain? That contest showed who the real God was. But this coming rain also shows that same truth. Because who's sending it? God, Yahweh. He's driving home the point that he alone is God. Baal was defeated. He was fake, shown to be fake. He was shown to be impotent, powerless. He can't do even anything, even the one thing he was supposed to do, send rain. He can't do, that's his thing and he can't do it. But Yahweh can and will. The true God can and will. God is in control over all his creation, over nature. He will send the rain. And the timing of the coming of the rain right after this contest makes it obvious that he is the one sending it. The rain is the exclamation point on the end of this contest that he just won. Let's keep reading, verse 42. So Ahab went up to eat and to drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel, and he bowed himself down on the earth and put his face between his knees. And he said to his servant, "Go up now, look toward the sea." And he went up and looked and said, "There's nothing." And he said, "Go again 7 times. And at the 7th time he said, "Behold, a little cloud like a man's hand is rising from the sea." And he said, "Go up and say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down lest the rain stop you." And in a little while the heavens grew black with clouds and wind, and there was a great rain. And Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. And so Elijah tells Ahab to go eat. If you remember, they've been there all day long. The prophets of Baal started in the morning and went through 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then Elijah started. So they've been there all day long. So he tells Ahab, go eat. While Elijah does what? Goes up the mountain further and prays. And when he goes up the mountain, he prays intently. He prays hard. His posture shows us that. He's bent down on his knees with his head between his knees. He is down on the ground as low as you get. He is humbling himself. He is praying hard to God. And we have the 7 rounds of prayer. And go look. So Elijah prays and says, go look to see if you see anything. A second time, he prays and says, go look. A third time, he prays and says, go look. A 4th time, he prays and says, go look. A 5th time, he prays and says, go look. A 6th time, he prays and says, go look. 7th time, he prays and then says, go look. Now, just saying that 7 times seems like a lot. But he actually prayed hard 7 times and said, go look. He's not just a simple, God, please send the rain now, it's time. But he's praying hard. Now, it's interesting just how hard he worked in prayer at this point compared to the way he prayed during the contest. Remember in the contest, it was a very simple prayer. He simply said, okay, God, at this time, show us that you are the real God and show this to the people and that they can repent and turn to you. It was real simple. And fire from heaven. Now, he's asking for rain and he's praying really hard. Now in the contest, that makes sense because God's trying to make a point, right? God, show you're real. But what's he doing now? He's still making a point. Who's the one to send the rain? God. And so it's a little, you might say, why? Well, I don't know why. I don't know why he's praying hard at this time or having to pray hard and repeatedly when the last time it was easy. Because the other thing I think, well, this was God's plan, right? When Elijah says so, we'll send the rain. Well, he said so, but he's still having to pray hard. Don't know why. But there's one thing that is certain. God doesn't always work the same way and at the same speed. Sometimes prayer is simple. And sometimes prayer is hard work. sometimes it takes a lot of effort. Sometimes God gives us an answer quickly, and sometimes it takes a long time, maybe even years. And we just have to keep trusting and praying. Well, there's one other thing about this prayer. You notice that Elijah, when he was on that mountain, he has been in charge. He has been telling everyone what to do, including the king. Go do this, go do this. Okay, now go eat. I mean, he's been telling everyone what to do. But now he goes to beg God for rain. As strong as Elijah appears, as bold or as amazing as Elijah seems, he is still totally dependent on God. Throughout Elijah's story, we see him praying. At times, there's nothing he can do himself, and he prays. That's what you see. He's praying. He's not superhuman, but he humbles himself before God and says, God, I need you. And he prays. In fact, this is what James says about Elijah. In James chapter 5, verse 17 and 18, he says, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. In other words, he wasn't superhuman. He was like us. And he prayed fervently that it might not rain, and for 3 years and 6 months it did not rain on the earth. Then he prayed again, and heaven gave rain, and the earth bore its fruit. He says Elijah was just a guy like you and I, but he prayed. That's what made the difference. I mean, God is the God of power. He's the one who sends the rain. But Elijah prayed. And this is instructive for our own lives. We serve the one true God, and he can do amazing things. We don't always know what he will do, but we are told to pray. We are told to ask. We are told to seek him. And so humble yourselves and pray. And then do it again. And do it again. Well, as Elijah is praying and saying, go look, finally the 7th time there's a cloud off in the distance. And so the rain is coming. And so he tells Ahab to hurry home. I mean, you don't want to get caught out in the rain. He's got about 17 miles to go to get home to Jezreel. That's the city he was living in. And so he doesn't want to get out and caught in the storm. Don't want to get caught, maybe he's riding a chariot. You know, if it rains all of a sudden, you've got mud. You could have flash floods. We talked about the brook that Elijah was by. It was like a wadi. When the rains came, it filled up with water. Things like that would happen. So he says, get on home. But look what happens. Verse 46, chapter 18 and verse 46. It says, and the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he gathered up his garments and ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. Chapter 19, verse 1, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do this to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. So God gives Elijah the miraculous ability to run that 17 miles as fast as Ahab could ride in his chariot. And so he goes out and he runs in front of Ahab to the city. Now, this is striking. Not just the fact that he has the ability to run 17 miles faster, or as fast as Ahab could ride in his chariot, but that the two of them are going together. It almost appears like they are together rather than opposed to each other, and this would be a first. It looks like God's prophet is leading the king, which is how it should be. But think about this. Ahab has just seen this demonstration of the power of God, this demonstration that Yahweh, God, is the true God, the real God. And now he has the opportunity to respond to what he has just seen. He has a decision to make. We don't know exactly what he's thinking, but he has a decision to make. Who will he follow? At the same time, when I read this about Ahab running to the city, I imagine if it was me, I'd be like, God did it. But he's running to the city, and I can't help but wonder what Elijah is thinking at that moment. It's just been demonstrated that Yahweh is the real God, and now he's running ahead of Ahab, and God is doing these big things. Is he expecting that Ahab and Jezebel will be convinced by what they just saw, what Ahab just saw, what just happened, and that they would reject the fake god Baal and repent and turn to the real God? Now, based on his running to the city and his later reaction, I think that might be the case. And having been in ministry for many years, that's how often you do something, God does something great, and you're like, yes, everyone's gonna. And it doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does. But I imagine that this is what Elijah is thinking, that he has great expectations. He expects another amazing miracle, that Jezebel's heart is going to be changed. I'm sure that's what he wants. But then I wonder, has he gotten used to the fantastic? Has he gotten used to God doing these big things? And does he expect God to always work that same way? Whether he expects that or not, it's not what happens. When Jezebel hears the news, he had the prophets killed, she's angry. And she promises with an oath that Elijah will be killed. We will be put to death by tomorrow. Now, this is a sad fact. But sometimes people are not moved to faith even when the evidence is right in front of them. Even when the evidence is clear or there is outright proof, they are not always moved to faith. Because faith, it's not just about knowing something. It's about believing. It's the heart. It's faith. But look how Elijah responds. And it's not what you expect. After what we've seen so far from Elijah, it's not really what you expect. Chapter 19 and verse 3 says, "Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he asked that he might die, saying, 'It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers.'" So he's scared and he runs away. And we say, wait a minute. It seems that this man of great faith has all of a sudden had a lapse of faith. That the bold prophet has become a timid runaway. Now, I'm not saying that Elijah shouldn't have tried to preserve his life. But there's more going on here than that. We're told first that he goes to Beersheba and he leaves his servant and goes out into the middle of nowhere all by himself. I think that this may indicate that Elijah feels his work is done. His ministry is over. He's finished. He's done. He left his assistant and took off. And then he sits down under this tree and he wants to die. He asks God to take his life. He feels like a failure. I'm no better than my fathers. Elijah is clearly disappointed and discouraged, and I'd say depressed. He's gone from this great spiritual high to the lowest low. He wants to end his life. Now, this is one of the tools of Satan, I believe. That right after God does something big, right after God uses you to do something, to make an impact in people's lives, Satan will attack you with doubts and with discouragement. Oh, maybe I should have done this. I could have done that differently. Maybe I shouldn't have done this. And sometimes it's yourself beating yourself up, and sometimes it comes from other well-meaning people. You should have done this. Oh, it would have been better if you. But you get attacked with these doubts and with discouragement. And spiritual highs often are followed by spiritual attacks that bring you crashing down to deep lows. And I only say this so that you are aware of it. And in these times, you stick close to God. So Elijah is discouraged, and he wants it all to end. But God's not done. And he's not done with Elijah. Look at verses 5 to 8. Chapter 19, verse 5. And he lay down and slept under a broom tree, and behold, an angel touched him and said to him, Arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones, and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. Now, the first thing Elijah does is he goes and sleeps. He had to have been exhausted. I mean, think about all the things he had just done. First, he confronted the king. Not just his next door neighbor, but the king, okay? He confronted the king and he challenged all the people of Israel. Then he took a bold stand against a mob of false prophets. Then he confidently represented God before doubters and outright opposition. Then he led the people in carrying out the law and disposing of those false prophets. Then he prayed hard for rain while other people ate. Did you catch that? He told Ahab, go eat, and he went and prayed. So he still hasn't eaten this time. So he prayed hard. Then he ran 17 miles at super speed in front of Ahab. Then he was confronted by Jezebel, who was just as committed to Baal as Elijah was to Yahweh. Then he ran for his life. He had to be exhausted. That would exhaust anyone, physically and mentally, emotionally. It would leave you exhausted. So after he slept a while, the angel wakes him up and tells him to eat. So he needs to sleep, but he also needs nourishment. He needs food. He needs to eat. Then he sleeps some more, and he's fed again. Now, what you see here is that God is providing for Elijah. He's sustaining him again. And this should remind Elijah of what God had done for him previously, when he was down by the brook and the birds brought him food and he was able to drink water from the brook. And then he sent him to the widow, and the widow provided for him. But God miraculously provided for them with the flour and the oil never running out. And we specifically have these two words here. He found a cake by the rock, just like the cake that he had asked the widow for. And there was a jar of water, just like the jar of oil that never ran out. And so these are reminders to him of God's provision. When you are exhausted and hungry, you don't think clearly. No one thinks clearly when they're exhausted and hungry. If you are discouraged, if you are depressed, make sure that your physical needs are being met. Make sure you get your rest and that you eat. And then don't forget how God has worked in the past. Remember what God has done. Well, now notice what the angel said to him. When he said to eat, he said you needed strength for a journey. God is sending him on a trip. And he went to Mount Horeb, which is also known as Mount Sinai. It's the mountain of God. It's where Moses received the law, the 10 Commandments from God. Where Moses was on the mountain for 40 days, being sustained by God. Elijah has been just given food and said, this will sustain you for your trip. And so he went there. And there's a couple interesting things about this trip. First of all, it's the mountain of God, which implies that he is going to meet with God. And secondly, it takes him 40 days. Now, he could have gotten there in about a quarter of that time. But for some reason, it takes 40 days. The number 40 is making a point. After Israel's failure of faith, when they sent the spies into the land after coming out of Egypt, they sent the spies in the land. 2 came back and said, yeah, we can do it. 10 said, no, we can't. And Israel said, oh, can't go in. What happened? They then wandered in the wilderness for how long? 40 years. It appears that God is challenging and correcting Elijah here, reminding him to have faith. But the other thing about this 40 is that when Moses was on Mount Sinai, he was on Mount Sinai for 40 days, getting the law and sustained by God. Here, Elijah is being prepared for something. God is not done with him. Keep reading in verse 9. There he came to a cave and lodged in it, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, and for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. So he camps out in a cave, and God speaks to him. He asks him, what are you doing, Elijah? And I think here God is confronting him and challenging him. You can see in his answer that Elijah's attitude is not all wrong. I mean, why is he discouraged? He's still passionate about God. His disappointment is from the fact that people are not following God. But he does exaggerate when he claims to be the only one left who's faithful to God. And then there seems to be a little self-pity. And now they want to kill me for it. He's still discouraged and feeling sorry for himself. He has experienced a great victory, but not the full results he hoped for, because it didn't bring a complete end to Baal worship in Israel. And so now he's giving up. But there's another important thing for us to notice here. Notice that it says, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, or came to him. God spoke to him and challenged him. And I think there's another challenge to us here is when you are discouraged, you need to hear and be challenged by the word of God. Verse 11. And he said, this is God speaking, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And then Elijah answers the same way. I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I, am left, only am left. And they seek my life to take it away. So God tells Elijah to stand and wait for God to pass by. This again reminds us of Moses. When Moses was on that mountain, and he asked God to show him his glory. And God said, well, you know what? You can't see my full glory and live. So here, I'll put you in this cleft in the rock. Some people believe maybe the same cave that Elijah is in right now, but we don't know. But he says, I'm going to put you here. And God covered him and let his glory pass by and let Moses just see a glimpse of the back of his glory. Well, now God is passing by Elijah. But we're told here that three things happen, and then we're told that God is not in them. There is a strong wind, that maybe like a tornado, because we're told that it broke the rocks in pieces. And then there's an earthquake, and then there's this fire. These are all powerful and fantastic things, but God was not in them. And then there was a whisper. And immediately Elijah recognized the presence of God. So he covers his face and he goes out to stand before God. Now, what does all that mean? It seems to be an object lesson that's making a point. God doesn't always operate in the realm of the spectacular or the fantastic. He often works quietly, simply, even in what we may think of as mundane. Now, we may expect him or want him to do big, flashy things. You know, this miraculous thing. Hey, God, obviously God showed up here to make a huge display to amaze people. And sometimes he does. And sometimes he doesn't. Oftentimes God works in whispers. He often just simple things like when you give someone a drink of water. The whisper of you helping a neighbor. The whisper of you encouraging someone. The whisper of praying for someone. The whisper of keeping your word. You see, God can work through small things as well. But Elijah got discouraged when the big event didn't have the final results that he expected. And God is saying, I don't always work that way. But I'm not done. When you're discouraged, recognize that God doesn't always work the same way. Keep reading verse 15. And the Lord said to him, Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death. And the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. Now, clearly God is not done, which means that his servant is also not done. And so he tells Elijah to go back to the northern kingdom, to go back where he was and continue his ministry. And he gives him 3 specific tasks to carry out. The first one is to anoint the king of Syria, not Israel, but Syria. Now, this is interesting because Syria is an enemy of Israel. But he tells Elijah, you go anoint the next king of Syria. You see, God will use that king to judge Israel for their idolatry. God is putting this foreign king in place to carry out God's judgment. Secondly, he tells Elijah, you need to go and anoint Jehu to be the next king of Israel, of the northern kingdom. He will eventually replace Ahab as king. And he says that Jehu will continue God's judgment, that whatever the Syrian king starts, Jehu will continue it. And then you go, Elijah, you need to go and anoint Elisha to succeed you as prophet of God. And so Elisha then will, when he is the prophet, he will continue God's judgment. And you see this, so God is bringing judgment on Israel for their idolatry. God is dealing with the Baal worship problem. He's not done. But on top of that, God tells Elijah that he's not alone. He says, you are not the only one who is faithful to God. There are thousands of true believers in Israel who have not taken part in the idolatry, and who will be spared of the judgment that is coming. Now, this is a word of correction to Elijah, but it is also a word of encouragement. Elijah, you are not alone. When you get discouraged, remember that you are not alone. Verse 19. So he departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen in front of him, and he was with the 12th. Elijah passed by him and cast his cloak upon him. In other words, Elisha was out working in the field, and Elijah comes on and throws his cloak over him, which is a way of saying, you come follow me. You're going to be my disciple. And Elisha gets it, because look what he says. And he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, let me kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow you. And he said to him, go back again, for what have I done to you? So he's basically, Elisha is saying, hey, let me go say goodbye, and then I'm totally committed to following you. And so that's what he does. And so I think there's one more verse. Verse 21, and he returned from following him and took the yoke of oxen and sacrificed them and boiled their flesh with the yokes of the oxen and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he arose and went after Elijah and assisted him. It's interesting. He takes and he breaks his yokes, the wooden yokes. He uses them to start the fire, and he cooks his oxen that he was working with. Apparently, he's done with that job. Okay? And so he feeds the oxen. They have basically a little party. He says goodbye, and he moves on to his next job. Elisha is now assisting Elijah. Elijah is now training Elisha to replace him, because God is not done. So there's still work to do for Elijah. When you're discouraged, keep serving. Don't quit. Get back up and serve God in whatever way you can. If life was a game of bowling, you may be in the second or third or fourth frame. Or you may be in the 7th, 8th, or 9th frame. But it's not done. It's not over yet. There's more to come. God's not done, so his servants are not done. God is still working, so we still have work to do. You may get discouraged. If so, get your rest. Keep your eyes focused on Jesus and keep going. We're not done because God is not done.